So I'm facilitating today because still kind of getting the new year schedule figured out. But yeah, so it's January 3rd, 2023, which is fun. The first clean call of the new year. Hope everyone had good holidays. I we have informal discussion today. I was just inspired kind of to talk about kind of some maybe like new goals for the new year and what we're looking forward to. I thought that might be kind of nice to have just I don't know, a little community share of what we're looking forward to and what we're hoping to achieve. And let's see. Obviously that we don't have to talk about that, or that probably won't take a whole hour. So if anyone else has topics, feel free to volunteer those as well. And I'll just say too, I met Wendy at AGU, which was fun in December. So I know some folks from Clean were participating virtually, and that was great to have as well. So had a good AGU, and then pretty much went right into a nice long break we had last week off at series. So that was really good, and I'm feeling very refreshed. I think everyone here, I don't think we need to do introductions. Does anyone want to do introductions? We feel, yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Cool, well, I guess
that was a great intro, Gina, and I'll admit, at least myself, am completely distracted with the impending AMS annual meeting in Denver, which for me starts Friday. Staff reports Friday, and it's Tuesday, and I'm shaking off the cobwebs from a few days off. So my brain is not on strategic thinking about the future of Clean. It's just not there.
No, I'm having a hard time getting my brain back into it a little bit, so I think that's fine. AMS is in Denver this year, right?
Yep.
That's exciting. Okay, cool.
The first of 3 times in Denver in the next like 8-10 years, something like that. They tend to buy cities in packs of 3 because you get better deals that way. The conference centers give you a better rate, and they give you your first choice week, one of those, your second choice week, one of those, and your third choice week, one of those. So
I've never heard of that.
What that's all about.
That's cool. Yeah, that's exciting. I also meant to say, if anyone has announcements, feel free to share any. Yeah, I guess we're talking about new and exciting things anyway, but feel free to jump in with announcements too. Yeah, Carolyn.
Just to be a little bit self-aggrandizing, I suppose. I wrote a chapter of an anthology book on education, and it came out at the end of December. I stuck the link in the chat. It's like 99 cents on Kindle, or you can, I mean, if you're really interested, there's a free PDF version as well that you can sign up for. It just won't be in like a fancy format. But it was all about the need for like teaching critical thinking and media literacy, and focusing on, you know, the impacts that's had on, in particular, like public health and climate. And I used an example from actually a talk I gave on like sea level rise and like getting multiple sources of information. So I'm really excited. It's not necessarily like climate centric, it's more education-y, but yeah, no, I'm really excited to have it come out.
Awesome. How did you find the experience of writing something like that? I've never written anything that long before.
Oh gosh, it's only like 4 pages in a small book. It's probably about 2,000 words, so it's not
too bad.
It was basically essay length, And it's the kind of thing that I say to everyone I meet every day of my life anyways. I just had to put it into slightly more cogent thoughts, but give me just a sec and I will drop the link for the free PDF version as well, if anyone wants to look at that. But I will promise I will in no way be offended if you don't.
Any other announcements?
I don't have an announcement, but I have something that I've been thinking about a lot that I wanted to deliver to Wendy. And with your meetings coming up this week, one of the things I see a lot of weather haters. Oh, I hate this cold weather. This isn't normal, which I'm in Washington State, so it should be normal. And I really wonder if we could reframe how when we're doing weather forecasting, if we could use a longer time horizon instead of the 30 years, because if we're only looking at 30-year averages, what's above or below average is not above or below average necessarily in historic time. It might be normal, or vice versa. It may be, for summer heat, it may be well above average if you look at historic time as opposed to 30 years. And so I think that is contributing to the general public's misunderstanding of how serious this situation is. Like, if they haven't seen climate stripes, they have no comprehension of just how bad our winters have gotten. And by bad, I mean not cold and not snowy in the northern part of the country, and those sorts of things. And so I wonder if the American Meteorological Society has thought about, we're skewing the data by only basing things on 30-year averages.
That's a great topic, Ginger. And let me just say that climatologists and, like all state climatologists and their practices are governed by federal agencies. I mean, the state does the state work, but they feed data into a federal process. And the defining climate norms by running 30-year averages is ingrained into part of the process. But you can be assured that all the scientists that deal full-time in that space, and especially the state climatologists, interact with the public all the time. The public that seeks to interact with them, right? By the materials they publish. But they're very aware of the flaws of the 30-year average in a non-stationary climate. And there are certainly other ways for communicating what is normal, what are our extremes. So, the AMS convenes the community to have those conversations. Members of the community do regularly talk about that topic. It's not really my space, but as just Wendy, a human that spends a lot of time talking about weather and climate, and I don't see so many weather haters. I see all the weather lovers, let me be honest. But people are atrocious. Even professionals in this space are atrocious at remembering what's normal, what isn't normal. People will say, we've never had this before, and it's a bold-faced lie. They had it last year. This is a whole psychological realm of, and everyone is bad at it. So it's so much more than just what data set you're using. It's something in human nature about saying, we've never had 3 feet of snow, and they may have had it 5 years ago and they just don't remember, or whatever. So this is a ripe area, and my guess is some of the other people on this call can expound upon my introductory answer to a very complex issue. My apologies to anyone that says, Wendy, you did that horribly also, because this isn't my space.
No, I think it's a really great conversation. Yeah, I've thought about this too. We had a deluge, you might have heard, Jim, what was it? Almost 5 inches of rain in a day on Saturday. And it just was nuts. So the local creek was just blew out of the channel and filled the whole local park in Diamond Park. One of my colleagues shot some video. You know, and then I kind of joke with my wife because she's always, oh, it's raining again. That's why we need sun. And I'm like, honey, we need rain right now. We really need rain in California. Not necessarily getting a quarter of our allotment in a day, you know, for the year is a little nuts. You know, we don't really want it that way either. But just kind of looking at like the statistics too, because I think when I first became aware of like rain in California and Oakland, we were running at like 21 inches average or something. This is like maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And now I look at the NOAA stats and we're like at 18 and a half. And so just in a pretty short time, the average has already shifted, you know. So I think, yeah, I really I find it really interesting. I thought about it too, the way that you're bringing it up, Ginger and Wendy, that how do we, it's this, and I think I liken it to the change in terminology with climate change, right? It's global warming. Now it's climate change and it's climate chaos. And each of those reflects better kind of what we're concerned about. It's not that all temperatures are going up or all going down, but that the weather's becoming more erratic. And as you said, we're no longer in a stable climate space. It's going to be a perpetually shifting climate space for the next 100, if not thousands of years, really. In some cases, right, sea level rise is predicted to just keep going, you know, despite what we do. But it's about how to have that conversation. And then it's also, to me, a little bit about how you identify with your place. You know, I'm literally like 6 blocks from where I grew up, you know, so I've been here over 50 years in the same place. So I feel like I have a sense of the place and what it's like, and maybe quote was like and should be like. But as folks move around the country, around the world, we have maybe less of an appreciation of the space that we're in, or at least a long-term understanding of it. And I'm not saying, you know, just because you live in one place all the whole time that you're an expert, but it does give you a little bit of perspective, I think, when you've been in the same spot, you know. That's my 2 cents. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear what other folks have to say around this.
The chat's lighting up. Did someone throw in some good resources about this issue? I was looking to the conversation in faces.
More about Carolyn's book chapter.
Oh, okay.
And other chapters that are good to read.
Okay.
But
I mean, one thing I'd say real quick is that, I mean, if anyone wants to have more than just a cursory, we've never had this before, or, you know, whatever, it's always a data question, right? Like, we can drive people to data, which in education is so great. They can look back at actual physical data and they can investigate. Is that true? How far out of the norm is it? Does it fall between the records? You know, when was the last time anything like this close happened? As we all know, it's terribly complicated, right? Like, was 30 years ever a good time frame? There were reasons 30 years was picked, but that was during a fairly stable time. But even to say that, you know, Eric, we've switched from 20 inches to 18 inches for a couple of years. Is that a signal? Is it meaningful? Will it go back up? It should go back up. I mean, a warmer world holds more water. So why is it going down? Well, it could be because we went from some atmospheric climate driver of, you know, something bigger than El Nino or La Nina or one of those kind of driving forces. And so you start weeding out different signals. I mean, there are people that spend their entire world in this space. And it's, you know, that drop from 20 to 18 may have nothing to do with climate change. It's actually not consistent in some way. So what? So, I mean, but the opportunity to dig into data and ask meaningful questions and investigate using mathematics is epic. So, you know, unless they just want to gripe, which people like to do a lot.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the whole intersection with microclimates, which, you know, in Oakland, you've had so much physical growth and across the topography. The landscape has changed so dramatically in your lifetime with urban development. And I know I'm in the mid-Columbia in Eastern Washington. And when I was a kid, we had no irrigated agriculture around us. It was all still dry land agriculture. And now it's all irrigated. So we have what feels like a marine layer. We get inversion layers. We didn't have those when I was a kid, and I'm sure it's because of all the moisture in the soil slowly coming back up out of the soil over the winter time. And you know, like I used to be able to see 100 miles on a clear day all the time, and now it's super rare. But it's our local. I don't think that's climate. I think that's our local landscape. So.
Jim, I think you had your hand up first, and I know Carolyn, you also had your hand up, so maybe
Sure.
after Jim.
I just had to change the skin tone of my hand because it didn't show up in the background. I think I would put in is I would hope I hope this will be a change we'll see a lot in 2023 of whose voice is heard in all these discussions, who is heard and who is not, because you know traditionally it has been the cranky uncle voices that get heard, right? They're part of a demographic that gets to get heard over everybody else. And I can say I'm definitely been in the thick of it in a very exciting way of how the voices of young people, multi-generational people of color, women get heard, because it's in the discussions of like, you know, how it actually goes. One example that came in is one that at least so far has been a one-sided conversation, but with some folks in NOAA, where thanks to Clean, thanks to Katie, we got a great announcement about a program that submissions can go in January called Picture Climate. I think I'll get that right, but it is meant to be kind of a contest, but students to put in pictures of what they think about climate change, of what's happening with climate change and that. Well, our response is we definitely want to, because we have photographers, students and so on doing that. But when our students picture climate change, they picture the changes. They picture the rain and the wind and the dryness and the heat. And Carolyn, your students are taking important measurements about air quality and temperature, right? They're doing that. But is their perspective seen as they heard? And with NOAA, the question was, to our students, the picture of climate is all those things, but it's also the other side of the coin is climate change is something that they care about, that they're doing something about. That is their picture of climate change. It isn't just, it's the weather and nobody can do anything about it, or it's the climate and nobody can do about it, or it's the oil companies and nobody can do anything about it. They are doing something about it. That is something that they're devoting their attention to. Others might devote themselves to soccer, or they might to music, or they might to drugs, or people devote themselves to a lot of weird, different, good, bad things. But our students are devoting themselves to taking action on climate change. Is NOAA willing to? Is that particular part of NOAA willing to expand what a photo can be? And right now we don't have an answer. I think it sort of took them off guard a little bit because it's framed to be, it's a photo contest about what climate change looks like, but not a human response to it, not doing anything about it. That's pretty out of touch, frankly. And I hope people will come around. And I know other parts of NOAA were kind of like, go, yeah, we want it to be both sides of the coin. So anyway, I'm kind of just going with all this, Wendy and folks addressing about how, how do we have it be heard and look at, this isn't normal. I think it's young people we've seen, young women in particular, who they are raring to speak on all these issues. And sorry, I've already taken up a lot of time here, but we're encountering in very deep and significant ways the resistance to having young women be heard, or young women played a role. And a lot of it's kind of just friendly or status quo holding, but we are together learning how to get through that resistance. So, and that's another story for 2023. Thank you.
Caroline, oh, you're unmuted already. Good. Okay.
I wanted to sort of piggyback off of what Wendy was saying about like changing the way that we measure things. And this kind of relates back to, what I was saying with my focus on like science communication. If we and I say we like as though I'm doing this, but you know, it's like a scientific community. If we change the way we measure anything, I would say that this, like, in terms of not just science facts, but in the mechanisms of science and epistemology and how we know what we know, it would need to be very clearly communicated to the public, like why we're changing that, what that means, how the data is perceived. Because I'm seeing, I mean, I live in Florida, it is a red state at this point. DeSantis was just reinaugurated today. And I can 110% see talking heads on Fox News. Oh, now they're changing, like they don't have enough good data to show that the climate's actually changing. You know, it's a hoax because they're changing how they collect data so that they can try to make this case. And that definitely relates back to, you know, like one of my personal crusades is the public understanding how science is done. Because if you remember that whole IPCC scandal where they were talking about normalizing the data and people saw the word like manipulate or skew or whatever, and it was a whole blow up about how science, and again, I'm waiting, like I want my shell bucks. If scientists and educators are really trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the entire planet for money, power, I assume, I want some of that because I haven't gotten it yet. But yeah, I would just say that if like I totally support, you know, making these changes, I would just think that like the education and communication portion is so important, because otherwise people don't understand why you would change it, and then that can undermine their faith in science.
A really good point. I don't know if I would have thought of that, Carolyn, and it's very true because people get nervous. They get a little jumpy when you try to switch things around on them, and instead of thinking of it as trying to improve and make things better, it's like, you know, there's an agenda behind it.
I deal with like, yeah, sort of like living where I do, and you know that I encounter those kinds of attitudes, and you know, all the time. And so it's kind of unfortunate, but maybe it's a good thing that like the first thing I think about when I hear about that kind of stuff is like how, you know, how to best communicate that in order to like, yeah, to get people on board. I mean, I think about it in terms of like the masks versus hand sanitizer and hand washing.
Yeah.
Scientists are flip-flopping and they don't know what there's like, yeah, like in spring 2020, nobody knew what the fuck I'm sorry. Like nobody knew what we were doing. And it's not flopping, and it, you know, I mean, I guess technically it's being wrong, but that's fully expected. And just, you know, people do not understand, or they don't want to understand, you know, what that kind of ongoing process looks like. And I just think that's really, really important to consider, especially in such a politicized issue as climate change.
Yeah. It's making me think of, I think that the better we can inform our education practices with real communication research. I mean, there are a lot of, I did my master's at George Mason, and there's a lot of really useful, practical communication, science communication research being done out there about how to talk to the public about these things. And I think that is just really aligned with what you're saying. And there's a lot, it's overwhelming because there's a lot there. But I think we need to be doing more of that research. But
I will say I 100% agree. I'm just going to show there's this place called the Frameworks Institute. If any of you are familiar with NOKI, they work with Frameworks Institute to, you know, sort of do that kind of research. There's a free, so I took the whole crash course on it, but they have a free course listed called Framing for Climate Interpreters. And they have a lot, I use these resources when we do our Clio Speakers Network and our Climate 101s. I've used this research and these resources in my science communication, and overall, I think it's been very helpful for people. So that right there, that is a free resource that you can go and check out their like info cards and strategies. So if that's the kind of thing that you're looking for, I highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I've never heard of them before. That's awesome. Carolyn with the amazing resources today. Very nice. Jim, I know you've had your hand up for a while. If you want to go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And I hesitate whenever I raise my hand, and it hasn't gone around round robin again. So please, anybody who didn't have their hand up, please speak before me. I want here. I guess though, I will look for every opportunity to bring up just how powerful it is that when the students that we are reaching are able to speak for themselves, to be heard. And how frequently that will be an antidote, and that will be a response on a particular question. When students in middle school and high school speak and take action and have scientific data, that's going to be a pretty tough argument that they are on the payroll of World Wildlife Fund, or oh boy, I mean, and like what major question, Google are they funded? Where's their bankroll coming in? I mean, so to the thing of this is all, scientists are all bought off. Well, these students are, and I also think it's I was kind of surprised how little blowback our students got when they called out the oil companies for what the oil companies have been saying to our students. Right. I was expecting more blowback that when our students called out in the STEM for All video showcase of what they have been hearing directly from oil company representatives, that Black women in particular, but young women of color, are incapable of doing anything around STEM. I mean, we've heard that from many different programs that are fossil fuel industry programs, and they never expected us to go public with what they were saying to us. Right. I was expecting a lot more blowback to them. I think part of it is, do you really want to get in an argument with middle and high school students and people of color? Do you really want to get into that argument? I mean, to go after Ben Santer and the scientists at AGU and things, okay, and you can go after the Freedom of Information Act and, get them, really give them a hard time. And I'm not saying that our students are immune from being under attack, but I just want to bring up how powerful it is to have young people be able to know how to speak on that. And I also bring up that we're doing it at a time when anybody who works with a federal agency now can say to that federal agency, that person, what does your boss's boss have to say about this? So if you're getting any trouble from anybody up the chain of command, go to the top, because Biden and Harris have just said, with the summit that we just saw, and I'll put back in the link again, we spoke about it, that just happened in December, they are saying the things that some of us have been saying in Clean for quite some time over, if we're going to take action on climate change the way the Congress has just put hundreds of $billions into it, it must include young people, it must include women, it must include people of color. You ain't going to get it done with just white old men. Even if you think that that's acceptable morally and socially, to it just be very inclusive to just one small demographic, you're not going to accomplish the things. You're not going to spend that money in any way that's going to do anything. So the bosses have said, we need to give a voice. We need to include, we need to have training. We need to have this in here. And I'll say the same thing to them. If you don't want to listen to our students, I think your boss's boss might come down and say, it's time that you do. So I think that's a real change we have for 2023. The White House is out in front of us right now. That's a good thing. It's nice to see the White House out in front of us rather than be like, oh my God, we don't expect anything from there.
Speaking of teenage girls, did you guys see the whole Greta and the troll story? Oh, you should go Google it. Some guy trolled her and told her about all his fancy cars and emissions, and she said, yeah, email me at Tiny Dick Energy, blah blah blah. And anyway, it got so many follows that somehow the Romanian government took interest, and he's been arrested on human trafficking.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
That's
did hear
wild.
about that. That was wild. Yeah.
yeah, pretty crazy.
Yeah, so not just some guy, like he is well known. He's basically a misogynist influencer, which
Right.
I love the 21st century, all the
I
promise
know.
of technology, and this is what we get out of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Sad.
he wouldn't stop trying to unplug my computer.
It's a very cute kitty.
That's a little.
I foster kittens, so they're. Anyways, yeah. So he basically does. He has this thing called Hustler Academy. He's got like a crypto pyramid scheme, and he puts out these videos, basically teaching young men how to date rape and manipulate women, and it's super duper toxic. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but if anyone ever wants to talk with me about the intersection of misogyny and like environmentalism and the perceptions of green behavior, that's a talk for another day. So he sent that all about it, and he replied in this god awful, like cringy AF video with him telling someone off camera, make sure you don't recycle those pizza boxes. I know, he's in his late 30s, and she just turned 20 today, and this is the level of discourse we've got online. But yeah, so what the Romanian authorities had their eye on him, but they didn't know if he was in the country. And apparently those pizza boxes were from a local Romanian chain. And she replied to that video saying, this is why we recycle our pizza boxes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, but like literally holding women hostage and forcing them into sex work. So I'm, just some people, it's like when they tell you who they are, believe them. Like,
Yeah.
yes.
But good for her for standing up to him. And in this particular case, I'm sure she usually just ignores these people. And how funny that this particular case where she didn't ignore him. So you're right, Jim. Don't piss off the teenage girl.
Wow, I had not heard about that. That's insane. It must be a lot of pressure I think about her a lot, some of the other youth who are kind of on the front lines, and how much pressure it is to get, just have so much, so many people watching you and saying things about what you're doing and criticizing. And I can't believe she just turned 20. She seems younger than that, but that just goes to show how, she's been around for a little while now.
Time's flying. Well, and I mean, that was one thing that I found really refreshing last year at COP, is how many of the youth leaders were saying, stop looking at me. I'm not the only one. I may be the person right here on camera right now, but there's a whole bunch of us out here, and how they all seem to be deflecting the attention and the fame and saying this is a universal problem. I'm just one voice. And I love that about them. And also the gun, reasonable gun safety control, whatever advocates all seem to also be pushing it off. Instead of hogging the limelight, they don't seem to want it, which is refreshing. But anyway.
If I don't mind, I'd like to get folks' reaction, because I've never asked our team how others feel about this. There's a thing of how different people in society project themselves, and there's how we interpret it and say things. And when I look at Greta Thunberg, which I'm trying to say it in the Swedish way, but Greta Thunberg in the English way, when I look at it, I have the greatest admiration for what they do, and just absolutely wonderful. But and I don't think it's belittling what she does and what the people she works with does to say, it's not just Greta, right? There's a lot of students, but she's not just working by herself, right? She's got a team. She's got social media people. She's got media people. Her parents are behind her. They'll play my parents are holding me back thing, but they've got a team there, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of normal. I mean, when you have a leader, when you have someone out there, they have people behind them. And where I'm kind of going with is, okay, so I mean, my question is, do people feel this is uncomfortable? Either what I'm saying is wrong, or maybe it's right, but we shouldn't say it because it comes out, people will be offended by that. But I think it's a little bit of an argument that I think is important to have, to be able to argue, is that multi-generational teams are important and are more effective in general than a single generational team. I mean, I respect it when young people work all by themselves, and I don't try to get in the way or tell you don't do that, but it's more effective when you're working in a multi-generational way. It's also indigenous knowledge. So I don't know if people think when they look at Greta Thunberg, am I saying the wrong thing, or should I not say that she's got people who are older working with her, and that's good.
She probably does. And yes, of course, her parents supported her goals and activities and initiative. Although I heard one of them and they said, what are we going to do? We can't really hold her back. Are we going to ground her? Because as she said, it's because of her Asperger's, she can't turn it off. I heard her say that on a interview. And but conversely, I worry. I think having the life experience and the knowledge that older people could help support the young activists. If you see, say, a kid in your community who's really shining and you want to help lift them up and give them more bandwidth or whatever, however you want to classify it, I think it's really incumbent upon the adults to be careful and lift their voices. And what I've seen in my community is a bunch of old white men primarily and a few old white women who say we need to diversify. And whenever anybody young or brown shows up, they talk over them still. And these are nice, well-meaning people. They're not overtly racist. They're not misogynist overtly. And they just don't know any better. And what I worry about is without a really strong conviction, which the Gretas have, that these kids just say, okay, nobody's going to really listen to me. I'd like your help and support. I don't want you to take over and do my work. And that's what I think, as a 59-year-old white female, I struggle with how do we lift and support without directing and taking over. And I think there's too many kids who probably get stifled or discouraged because the adults say, let me help you. And guess what? The way we've been doing it hasn't worked. So maybe we should just sit down and shut up,
Yeah, as an educator, I'm in the same space, in the same demographic, 55-year-old white guy, like where, and kind of, Jim, what you did, just modeling, being aware that you'd raise your hand a couple of times and said, hey, who else would like to speak? Just sort of that setting up this norms of listening throughout the communities that we work with, being cognizant of who's not speaking. And I sat in on one of the COP conference sessions driven by young people, and they were saying the same thing that we're saying. They want to be heard. They want independent youth voice within the COP space, but they want allies and they want support from older folks. So they're really saying the same things. It's just, how do we make the table truly inclusive? It's not that we have to any of us have to shut our voices off. We just want to hear all the voices. So how to create that balance? And I think it's just a perpetual awareness, again, of who's speaking, who's not at the table, you know, the 10 Strands project that we're working on in California with respect to the climate curriculum development for K-12. We've talked a lot about that within the planning group, because even within the planning group, we felt like there's not enough diversity here. We don't have enough educators. We don't have enough young people. We don't have enough people of color. So how do you bring in at the beginning, you know, at the formative point of the project, a really truly diverse reflection of folks that are going to benefit from this curriculum as drivers, as creators, not just here's a curriculum we've created, please pilot it for us. You know, we want to know ahead of time, what do folks need from all these different vantage points and perspectives and demographics. So we've been really talking about that, which I really appreciated about the process, because it's ongoing work, I think, is, from my perspective, but I appreciate the conversation.
A real quick one is, don't forget, the people who are here were once young, not that long ago. And most of the people in this chat right now were young women, some not very long at all ago at all. And we, you know, I guess that, you know, that voice is still there, and there's still that experience. And there's how did you all get a place in climate change and education? So I just, you know, that thing of shutting people off once they make to be 22, or shutting people off when they're under 22. I mean, why? I mean, it goes both ways, right? Why don't we talk together?
And
By the way, a placeholder for Eric. I do want other people to talk, but I want to come back to you, Eric, on something you have done 24 years ago that I don't know if you fully get. Okay, that speaks to this. I'll come back to you.
And I'll just say, kind of on the other side of what we've been talking about, I think that it's a lot to expect that, I'm preaching to the choir right now, obviously, but it's a lot to expect that young people will solve the problem. It's not, you know, a problem that they've created. So to a certain extent, you do have to step up and help. I guess that's just the how is the question, as an adult. But that's, you know, I've been doing climate change work since I was in high school, and that there was a point in time in college where I got really overwhelmed, because it was like, it felt like it was my responsibility, and that everyone was just, I would have so many people come up to me and say, like, you're saving the world, which is a very nice sentiment, but it was also just like, wow, that's a lot of pressure. And like Jim said, I'm sure I'm not the only one here, because there are a lot of people who were also recently in that position as a younger person. But I think that everyone here has obviously good intentions and is trying to support as much as possible, but it is hard. I don't know if we have any more thoughts about that. We can also, feel like this has been a good, easy flowing conversation, so feel free to bring up any other new thoughts or ideas too.
If I would, I'm gonna mention the one for Eric. Okay. This is not about me, but however, there is a thing of how I came in to do climate education specifically. I wanted to do it more than 24 years ago. That's something I wanted to do as a volunteer, and I looked for where I could do it. I also wanted to do science education. You know, I was bringing in a lot of Venn diagram, things I love. And when Chabot Space and Science Center was opening, that was an opportunity. And I checked it out and I looked, and it was going, and this was a really great thing. One of the things, and so Eric is a big part of making Chabot Space and Science Center, especially in Earth Environmental Science, happened. I think one of the greatest things that Chabot has and still has is the Galaxy Explorer program. It's a fantastic program that allows high school students and somewhat middle school students to be teachers in science, to be educators, to learn, to do projects. They have a very good track record of people going into science and STEM and other fields important. But at Chabot, especially in the early years, that's where I learned. I went to learn how you do education well? How you make outstanding education? How do you do that? And it was an opportunity to learn and then be creative in doing it. Well, at Chabot, you have these you have a program for teens as volunteers, but they are not off on their own. That's not the way it works. They always work with adult volunteers like me. We are always working together in what we're doing. That's the way the program's set up. I learned multi-generational education at Chabot through doing that and working with the Galaxy Explorers, and learned that it doesn't make any sense in my mind. You respect it when the generations are working separately, but it doesn't make any sense to be one of those that do that. Why not work together? Why not bring in wisdom from before and spirit and all the things that young people have? And frankly, it's also, I think it's dead wrong. I think, again, I respect it, but I think it's dead wrong when people say, well, see, the young people have to fix it because the older people haven't been doing anything about climate change. Well, if that were true, we wouldn't know that climate change exists. If that were true, we wouldn't have done anything all these years. Jim Hansen would have done things. All the men and women who have been doing things on climate change for 30 years or 200 years, there have been plenty of people who have done so many things, right? You just go, it's just not true that nobody's been doing anything about climate change. And now it's on the young people to do it. That's just not true. And we're going to throw away all that experience and knowledge. We're not going to learn from that. We're going to make the same mistakes, because that's what's going to happen. If we don't encourage young people to learn and work with people who've been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 200 years, they're going to make the same mistakes. And that's what I see in the programs that are like, we're just young people. They're doing the same thing that the people who are 20 years older, exactly the same thing. They're not learning from adjusting and doing things. It doesn't, I guess I have to be good at saying it's not to be critical of those programs really per se, but but some of us to advocate that. And I mean, I think it's to create the realm of, for those of us who are over 22 or 32 or 42 or 52 or 62 or more, maybe, there's plenty of room to work with young people. There's plenty of places, there's plenty of ways. And I do not see the young people saying, I just don't get it. I don't get this back of, well, leave us alone, right? It's if you're good at letting them speak, if you're good at allowing them in a place. But I mean, an example will be like when we just had a meeting with the head of, behind me is the Natural History Museum. We just had another big meeting with the directors there. And we're moving along energy there. We're doing education there. Well, these are great people doing wonderful things, but they'll bring up to our young people some technical problem that's a challenge to something that they want to see happen. Okay. Now, I try as much as possible, prepare them, bring in my engineering background and so on. So they're prepared, so they know it. But it's very common that there'll be some new technical thing that they don't know about at the time. But by the next meeting, they will understand it, because I will bring in my expertise as an electrical engineer to say, well, that's the answer to that one. Where are they going to get that if I'm not there? Right? Again, it's not about me, but we're not getting from the young people. They don't want to hear the, how do you tell what a high intensity discharge lighting, why it has that spectral analysis. I mean, they're 13. How are they going to get that? But they can understand it because they're working with someone like me, or Wendy, or Katie, or Deb. We're sharing this kind of knowledge. So I think there's and thank you. I think it was Carolyn wrote in the chat that Greta is not actually an advocate of let the young people. The young people should work alone and not listen and not learn and work with anybody who's over 22. I mean, I don't really actually hear her saying that. I think that's how it kind of gets characterized. So, I mean, if that's, anyway, thank you for bringing that up.
Well, good points. It's a very good discussion. Thanks for, I feel like you kind of spearheaded this discussion, so thank you for that, Ginger. Also, I see that Deb has her hand raised.
Hi, I just wanted to voice my thanks for your discussion, whether or not it's preaching to the choir or not, because hearing how you all approach different things is helpful to me. And yeah, I got teenage girls. And so hearing how you are, was it Carolyn, you said about epistemology, how we know what we know. And Wendy, you talked about how do you take each data point and how do you weigh it? Where do you put it in the larger picture? And I love that because especially with the data visualizations like NOAA, the art, you can put the data in one picture and see it instant. Well, it's easier to grasp all the variables. It's, it's changing. So you can kind of, it's one little more, one tiny piece of the puzzle about how it's changing. So I just wanted to echo thanks for, it's not just hearing preaching to the choir to me, it's hearing like, oh yeah, here's all the pieces of the puzzle, and here's how, these four go together this week. And it's that much closer. So I just wanted to mirror that back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Maybe a quick one, and maybe I invite others to do the same, because I know we only have 5 minutes left. But one of my goals, back to kind of your original prompt for us, Gina, about this year, is how to communicate using the tools that we're all aware of, the visualizations, the stories, the conversations, the dialogue, the communication, to really understand different audiences and sort of from the big to the small. So kind of back to the precipitation conversation that we had. Why is California's precipitation changing? Why is it drier? But why, like you said, Wendy, like we expect more precipitation, we expect ultimately more atmospheric rivers, but yet we might be in this space right now where the Pacific high is diverting, temporarily storms away from California. So we're drier for a while, but then it's going to shift again. So how to make that kind of concept accessible to different audiences of different ages and different levels of understanding about climate. So that's kind of my personal goal, but I'd be curious for each of you, like going into this year, what you're up to.
I don't know what I'm up to. I interviewed for a job. Well, it was just the first interview, and I don't know if I'm going to get the next interview, but to do the environmental justice, the internal management of the environmental justice component of the new state law in Washington for the Department of Ecology. So we'll see, but yeah, stuff's got to shake out. I'm thinking in our area, we need to do a citizens assembly and start working on a climate action plan, because our community leadership is not being responsible. And between cold snaps and heat waves, we're going to end up with dead people if somebody doesn't do something.
I could say the saddest thing ever is that we'll end up with dead people no matter what we do. It's about the numbers. People who deal with severe weather as their full-time job with our sworn government civil servants trying to protect people from hazards of life and property, we always lose people. It's
how many and how miserably. I mean, yeah, everybody
how
dies
miserably.
Right.
And also, so something we see all the time now is that increasingly it's not a matter of the science, it's the ooey gooey communication factors. The hand wringing that's going on in the meteorology community about the number of people that died in Buffalo and Western New York on something that was so well forecast is just destroying these people, because they did everything they could, but they couldn't overcome the pressure for people to still travel because it was the holidays and they wanted to be with their family more than they wanted the weather situation to threaten their lives.
And it's not the forecaster's job to, unfortunately, it's not the forecaster's job to worry about human behavior. And the public
But
health
it-
system
but it
and
is.
state patrols. Yeah, yeah.
But it is,
it-
and it comes back to them. If their job is to
Mhm.
protect life and property, it's not
Mhm,
enough
mhm.
anymore to just tell people it's going to be very bad. The amount of energy that's going into to trying to explain the human impacts of very bad so that people will internalize the message is huge.
Mhm.
And that's all going to apply with climate change too. Not gonna, does now.
Did I tell you people about that French project where they did a night in the gymnasium and they basically did an evacuation drill? Did I ever mention that? I'll go find it. It was something I learned about in my public engagement community, and I really wish we'd do that in the US, where we're like saying, okay, yeah, evacuation is a hassle and it's scary. Let's practice it in case we need to do it for real.
Sounds like we have plenty to talk about this year.
Yes, I was just gonna say, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the chat, but thanks, Eric, for posing that question. As always, if you have any ideas of things that you want to talk about on the clean calls, please let me know. You can always email me, but we have a big year ahead. So thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Appreciate
Happy
it.
Thanks, everyone.
2023. Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.